Sunday to talk about science. Woo! We are Death and Decay, the science of gaming's favorite diseases. And if you are here, there's only one reason. It's because you've died. You may have died a lot of times in video games, and I've brought together this table of somewhat stable scientists to let us know that there's nothing to be afraid of. None of these diseases, decaying, glooms, causes of death from video games are actually real. They can't hurt you. Or can they? Right? Well, let's introduce our panel for today. I am your moderator and host. My name is Lexi. I am the layman on the panel. I am not a scientist. I am an English teacher, but I love video games, and I am an expert in befriending scientists and asking them all my questions about science.
My name is Andrew Garcia. I'm a PhD student in chemistry. I think carbon is based, and I am carbon-based.
All right, I'm Lizzie. I am also a PhD student in microbiology, and I research cancer and virus, specifically immune responses to them. And I am a salad connoisseur. I hate Caesar salad. Don't give me Caesar salad. If I wanted to eat crunchy water, I'd eat celery.
That's fair.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michelle De Palma. I have a PhD in immunology, and I teach at ASU. I'm also a postdoc. I study cancer, virus immunology, and vaccines against parasites. And for me, I'm indifferent to salads.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Hunter. I am a vaccinologist by training, salad aficionado by night, and also a very sleepy scientist.
Hey folks, I'm Brendan Favre. I'm a PhD candidate at ASU studying molecular and cellular biology. I grow vaccines and plants, and I think salads are offensive to my research, so I hate them. Also, I've gained a lot of pounds since this first panel photo I took, so just gonna eat some of my research, level up. I'm blue now.
And for the way this panel is going to go, we are going to start off with our experts talking about different ways that diseases in video games kill us and how they may or may not encroach on the real world. After that, the fun part is audience interaction. We will ask you, the audience, for all of your pressing questions, all of the ways that we've died, and we will ask our scientists what they think about the solutions or the methods of death in video games. To start off, Andrew.
And to kick us off, I'm going to be talking about the gloom in Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. Good start, great start, awesome. So, to begin, I have to define what gloom is. In Tears of the Kingdom, gloom is a sludge-like red and black substance unleashed by Ganondorf that has three main properties. First, it semi-permanently or permanently drains life. Second, it decays metal weapons. And third, its health effects can be undone by sunny foods with a sunny effect. Based on those effects, those three properties, gloom is just a petrochemical sludge that constantly releases good old-fashioned heavy and flammable air, also known as water gas, water damp, fire damp, illuminating gas, Dawson gas, Mon gas, powder gas, power gas, or phlogiston. But more commonly known as carbon monoxide. So, for those of you who don't know, carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas that has some fun properties, namely that it is poisonous. And that's actually about it. That's its main property. So the mechanism of carbon monoxide poisoning is a little more interesting. So carbon monoxide has a high affinity for metals, like the iron and hemoglobin in your blood. So on inhalation, carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin in your blood like oxygen normally does. But unlike oxygen, it doesn't unbind very well from hemoglobin. So without treatment, carbon monoxide prevents oxygen from getting transported in the body, sort of asphyxiating you from the inside on a cellular level. So that's great. Anyway, we're going on to reason number one why gloom is carbon monoxide. It's fine, don't worry about it yet. So the reason number one is health loss to gloom cannot be recovered by regular healing items. So similarly, in real life, there is no antidote really for carbon monoxide poisoning. You just have to treat the symptoms and hope that things go well. Yeah, reason number two is the decaying metal weapons. So fun fact, steel alloys like swords are made out of, typically contain the element nickel, and nickel has an even higher affinity than iron for carbon monoxide. So much so that nickel reacts on contact with carbon monoxide to form a volatile organic compound called nickel tetracarbonyl. So theoretically, this could do this to your this. Anyway, going on to the third reason why the gloom is carbon monoxide is gloom damage is healed by sunny foods. And this is a little bit out there. This is the biggest stretch and the most unsatisfying reason because it makes us ask the question, why do we have to eat vegetables? So the reason why we have to eat vegetables is because vegetables and plants in general are good at bioaccumulating nutrients, including metals. So I did that joke already. Sorry, never mind. So theoretically, plants like sundelions and Tears of the Kingdom could have high amounts of a metal, some theoretical metal, that has an even higher affinity for carbon monoxide. Let's call this let's call it element Z. That's a lame name. Okay, let's call it zonaitonium. Okay, that's fine, whatever, keep going. So zonaitonium, clearly the answer for carbon monoxide poisoning. With a higher affinity for carbon monoxide, it rips the poison off of the hemoglobin on a molecular level, and it's probably also what the Master Sword is made of, hence its darkness sealing properties. You just slice at the carbon monoxide and it's gone, we're good. And then with the Master Sword in hand, there's no way we can lose the gloom. It's the total answer. It's, wait, never mind. Moving on.
Thank you, thanks. All right, now it's my turn. All right, I like to be a little bit more interactive with the audience, so I want to get to know you just a little bit. So for those of you born in the 80s, 90s, and remember this is PG, finish these lyrics. From the window, nice, good job not going any further. All right, from those from 2000, 2010, finish these lyrics. Oh. I want it. Perfect, good job. And those 2010 till now, oops, lovely, perfect. And any unborn? No? Raise of hands, a little woo woo if you've got an unborn. Because I do. I do have a parasite growing inside me as we speak, since we're talking about microorganisms. And Michelle will actually talk about parasites. So, I will be talking about this very unpopular game, The Last of Us. Who remembers this game? Woo! Awesome. So just a little reminder, this storyline revolves around Ellie and Joel, the two main characters. So that's the the game depiction, and this is the TV series depiction. And myself, as well as other females and males, can refer to Joel as Bobby. Let's be honest. So in this post-apocalyptic world, it's being taken over by this zombie fungus and causing people to act erratic and attack other people. And Ellie, being the golden child, she is immune, so everyone wants a piece of her. So can this actually happen in the real world? Do we actually see this in nature? And you're probably thinking, yeah, probably not. I'm not buying it. But let me tell you about some fungus among us that can actually do this. So say hello to the Cordyceps.
Hello, Cordyceps.
Hello, Cordyceps.
So this specific Cordyceps is actually known as the zombie ant fungus. It can cause erratic behaviors in ants, and the reproductive stage is actually pretty short, so about 4 to 10 days. And there's actually 600 species, but we're going to talk about this specific one that infects ants. So how does this all start? So the fungus essentially farts, releasing its spores. And if a spore lands on an ant, it infects the ant and takes over its entire body, right? Leading to mind control. And everyone say it with me. All hail Hypnotoad. So this actually leads the ant to actually climb to the perfect environment for the fungus to grow. And the fungus will start to grow outside of the ant, leading to this very cool antenna that can release spores. And maybe this ant can get FM or Sirius radio, who knows. So this actually released spores and actually can infect an entire colony of ants, destroying that colony. And these aren't the only ones, so there's many other, and you can see the inspiration from the game and the show. So maybe you're buying it a little bit, but let's talk about humans. Can we be infected by fungus? Absolutely, and it's not always the fun kind. So, but can Cordyceps specifically infect and kill humans? Negatory, Batman. Not really. So this can't really happen, but maybe you're tired of your 9-to-5 job and maybe you want a change of scenery. So maybe you're hoping the apocalypse can happen, right? So let's fix this. As Bob the Builder says, can we fix it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So let's start off. How do we fix this? So the first problem is temperature and immune response. Ants are cold-blooded. We're warm-blooded. Cordyceps can't survive in our normal temperature. Immunologically speaking, we also have different immune responses. We have B and T cells, and ants do not. They're very basic. They like pumpkin spice. So toadstool can't stand the heat. So how do we fix this? Let's modify the fungus. We can introduce different genes via genetic engineering, or we can just force it to evolve. So also called adaptive evolution, where you put it in an environment that you want it to grow and save all the ones that can grow at that temperature or environment. So kind of like Pokemon, you can force a Pokemon to evolve. So say it with me. Who's that Pokemon? So you can make a better, stronger fungus. Cool. So second problem, we have differences in brain. For instance, ants only have 250,000 neurons. So not as many as humans. We have 85 billion on average, and I can't speak for everybody. Don't look at them.
Hey.
But we know who they are. So how do we fix this? There actually are brain-infecting fungus, so we can just essentially isolate those genes. So you're probably thinking, no more, this isn't fun anymore, this is too real. So I'll stop here. Can this actually happen? Not yet.
All right, thanks, Lizzie. All right, so I'm gonna talk to you guys about the power of parasites. And so when you guys think about parasites, you might think about something that looks like this, right? Maybe a worm. That cute one in the right-hand corner, that's the one I actually work on. These might be a little bit terrifying, right? But you also might think of maybe your friend that uses your Netflix account without asking, right? So what is a parasite? By definition, it's an organism that benefits or obtains nutrients at the expense of a host. Typically, it lives in or on a host, and it causes host damage. And so by definition, this is a parasite, right? But actually, by definition, your friend is kind of also a parasite, because it's an organism that benefits at the expense of a host. So benefits at the expense of a host. At the expense of a host. At the expense of, okay, all right, maybe we shouldn't focus too much. We shouldn't focus too much on the definition of a parasite, right? Because the parasite I want to focus on is X-parasite from Metroid Fusion. And so X-parasite is a hostile organism that's native to planet SR388. And so a little bit of a recap. Essentially, X-parasite can infect everything except Metroids, right? And I'm not going to focus so much on the story plot as much as I am about X-parasite itself, right? So there's a few characteristics about X-parasite that make it unique. So it's intelligent, it can shapeshift, it can adapt to extreme cold, it can take over the bodies and minds of animals, and it can infect by just contact. And so the question is, can X-parasite be real? Let's find out. Maybe we can try and actually make X-parasite. And so if I was going to give you a recipe to make X-parasite, my first ingredient would be slime mold. And so if you guys don't know, slime mold is, as the name suggests, a very slimy single-celled organism that is actually pretty intelligent. And it doesn't have neural networks, it doesn't have a brain, but it can find food on its own in a maze. And so, as this GIF shows, if you actually take slime mold, well, sorry, you guys. As you can see on the screen, if you take food and you put it in two separate parts of a maze, the slime mold will find that food. And not only will it find it, but it will use the shortest path to actually get there. And I can explain more of that another time if you want. It's really pretty interesting. So my second ingredient would be Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And so this is something that can adapt to extreme cold. Now I want to ask you guys, how many of you guys think you've ever come into contact with this? How many of you guys saw this and thought, wow, I would eat that? Okay, well, I want to let you guys know that you probably have eaten it because it's yeast. Yeah, and so yeah, very interestingly though, this can adapt to extreme cold and it can do a few other things. But this is going to be in my X-parasite recipe. All right, and so my third ingredient is going to be Cordyceps, which Lizzie so eloquently described can take over the bodies and minds of ants, right? And so that's my third ingredient. My fourth one is going to be Schistosoma. And so these parasites are actually able to infect just by contact. And so these are the ones that I actually studied. So I find them so interesting because what they can do is they have these little hookworm tails. And they actually grow in snails, or that's part of their life cycle, but they'll take their tails and literally hook onto skin and then find their way in and get to different organs. And they can cause a lot of damage. And part of why it's so hard for your body to fight these is because of a concept called parasitic immune evasion. And so how many of you guys know what an antibody does? Okay, a lot of people in the crowd. So essentially, if I can summarize it, antibodies are part of your immune system, and they help you clear things that you don't want in your body from your body. And so in this case, an antibody is essentially activating an immune cell, that little pink thing over there. And so what happens is the antibody binds to the schistosome, or the worm, and it causes degranulation of an immune cell. However, these are sneaky. And what they do is they have these little proteins on them that will actually grab those immune factors, those antibodies, so that your immune cells cannot get rid of them. And they're actually even sneakier. So what they'll do is they'll actually grab human proteins and coat themselves in it, almost like a disguise, right? And so it's basically hiding from the immune system. Your body thinks it's itself instead of a worm. And so that's immune evasion. So with all that said, how do we make an X-parasite? What's your recipe? So your first recipe, 1 maze full of slime mold, 4 packets of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, 10 schistosomes, and a dash of Cordyceps. So whisk these together and bake them at 350 for 20 minutes. And will we get an X-parasite? Probably not. And it's not just because most of these organisms die at that temperature. Yeah. Okay, so we can't bake them because they're all going to die anyway at that temperature. Can we genetically engineer it? Also, probably not, because biologically, a lot of these characteristics are not compatible with each other. And so, should you be worried? Really, not so much. So I'll leave you with this cute picture of this cat that's also AI generated and very cute. But my very last thing I want to talk about is that we are working on parasitic vaccines because parasites are actually, in a lot of parts of the world, a big problem. And if you guys want to hear more about that, I can talk about it a little bit later. That last one, some super cool scientists are working on. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. Hand it over to Joe.
So we start a little bit with the gloom, and I'm going to talk about doom. And that is because we're going over different video game bioweapons in my review of different game bioweapons programs. So there's bacteria, fungus, parasites. We heard a lot about fungus and parasites, but I'm going to focus on viruses. Oh my, some of the deadliest pathogens that exist. I'm going to talk about it in the context of 2 of my favorite games, Mass Effect 2 and the original Fallout. So starting with Mass Effect 2, a brief refresher. It's a lot of different species of aliens coming together on a fun journey to save the universe. And the key there is a lot of different species of aliens. And in this game, there is a bioweapon that's released on a station called Omega Station. And is this a good place to release a bioweapon? Yes, it's a great place. Why? Because it is out in the middle of nowhere. I'm doing an experiment. I want to see if this bioweapon works really well. It has a lot of different species of aliens on it. Let's release it there, have a nice isolated incident. And that's exactly what happens in the game. So these nice guys, the Vorcha, release a bioweapon into Omega Station, and what we know about this bioweapon is it's made and released by the Vorcha on the behalf of a group called the Collectors. What the Collectors do, they like taking live humans back to their part of space and doing awful, terrible things to them that we're going to skip over because this is a PG-13 panel. What else do we know? This does not affect humans or Vorcha. They want the humans alive, and the Vorcha are releasing it on the behalf of these collectors, so they don't want to die in the course of releasing it. But it's killing every other species, which is crazy because it's extremely deadly to all these other species that are very diverse. The other thing we know is that Morden, being awesome, makes a cure during the course of the game. So what is this biological weapon? It's likely a virus. Viruses are really good at having a rapid onset, so that means you get infected and then a couple days later you already have symptoms and are going through the process of, in the case of this bioweapon, dying a terrible death. It also is killing pretty much 100% of the people that it infects, and viruses really are the only pathogen that can do that on a massive scale. It's also obviously engineered to me because it doesn't affect Vorcha and humans. Usually if you're having something that affects multiple different species, it's not going to be so distinctly partitioned out that two groups are totally unaffected and everyone else is affected. And this makes me think of some real life parallels. So here comes a little bit of the doom that I promised you. So there's two viruses that I would put together, shake up, and then release on Omega, hoping that they combine some of their traits together to create this bioweapon. The first is a real-life virus known as Nipah virus. Don't be worried, it doesn't really spread that well at the moment, but it's interesting in that it kills a lot of the people that it infects, like certain other viruses, and then also it has a broad range of infections. So it can infect humans, dogs, pigs, bats, pretty much every mammal. There's another virus called herpes virus. Herpes viruses have been around basically forever. They've been growing and evolving with every species of pretty much every creature that is on Earth, and that's why it can infect birds, reptiles, mammals, insects, and even mollusks. So that is a very diverse infectious agent. So those two things together, you basically get the bioweapon that's released on Omega. Is this a good or bad idea, though? From the point of view of the collectors making a bioweapon, 11 out of 10 bioweapon, this is a great idea. Highly deadly and effective, didn't kill the humans or Vorcha, so they don't want that to happen, so it's going great. It's able to infect all the other species, and it has a contained release point. So overall, good job. So the next game I'm going to talk about is Fallout, and in Fallout there's something called the forced evolutionary virus that mutates people into super mutants and also does a bunch of other wacky stuff I'm not going to be able to touch on in the time we have, but it's released in a vat. Like, really? A vat? We have a space station and we have this horrible bioweapon, and in this you have to dip the whole person into a vat? Okay, we're off to an interesting start. So what do we know about FEV? It was originally designed back in the day to create super soldiers very successfully. It can create super mutants, so if you have a lot of radiation damage and your whole body is dipped into a vat, you get a lot of interesting mutations, therefore super mutants. It works better on non-irradiated individuals, which is an interesting trait of this virus. It can't replicate or spread. That's not great for a bioweapon. You know, that's one of the things you want to do, but you know, if you're targeting specific people, seems to work out, but then you have to dunk a whole person in a vat. So how would this actually work? So FEV, there's a lot of information about it. The designers did a great job in taking real life science and applying it to this virus. It's not a virus, it's a virion, which I'll talk about in a second. But it can overwrite your DNA, similar to certain viruses, so retroviruses, so HIV is an example of that, rewrites your DNA as it infects you. But this is programmable. It's not perfect, but it's programmable. So in the modern day, we're doing a lot of genetic engineering on people. So sickle cell, for instance, there's a treatment for sickle cell where you go in and you put a gene to create a correctly produced blood cell and get rid of a lot of the symptoms of sickle cell. So FEV was probably originally made for something like that and then taken over by the evil groups to make super soldiers. Has to have some sort of retroviral activity, and then is a virion, not a virus. So it's not infectious. It has all of the outside proteins and particles that let it enter into a specific person, release, rewrite their DNA, but it can't then infect another person. This is a pretty bad bioweapon, actually, now that I think about it, especially because you have to use a really high dose in a vat. So some real life parallels, there's HIV, which I mentioned. It's not easily spread. You have to have very close person-to-person contact, and it does rewrite your genome a bit. And then there's also herpes and adenoviruses and a couple other viruses that people have taken, engineered, and can be used to insert portions of DNA into someone that has a genetic disease and overwrite that gene that's bad with a gene that's good and cure them of that specific disease. Also, they're non-infectious. So, okay, we have our two real-life parallels, but is it a good or bad idea? Well, it's not even a real virus. It can't really spread. You need a whole vat of it. So, -2 out of 10, terrible bioweapon, but it's a really cool gene editing tool. So a little positivity instead of doom. So, last thing I want to touch on, pitfalls of bioweapons. They're really scary to talk about, but they're indiscriminate. That means governments and people that could make these don't really want to make these. All the programs were shut down a long time ago in the late 60s for this reason. They're also difficult to make in the first place and control. As Michelle mentioned, it's hard to make something that is that extremely pervasive and deadly. They can mutate really easily, so you can get people who are immune to them just naturally, and you can also, as Morden does in Mass Effect, make countermeasures. So benefits, 0, risks, infinite.
All right, folks, so it seems our little wagon has reached the end of the trail. We're just about to. Although, last I checked, I am a biologist, not a geographer. Oregon is that way, right? So we're gonna go ahead and have our little wagon reverse. We actually came all the way from Phoenix to come talk about this, the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're so happy to be here at the end of Oregon Trail, you know, in this beautiful, beautiful city, Oregon. Washington. This is Oregon. This I think is Oregon, right? This is Portland. Oregon has more bears, and I haven't seen any bears outside. Also, I think Oregon back in the day was all in black and white. Everything is clearly colorful here. But from what I hear, at least in Oregon, you can grill meat on daggers and eat it over a fire. You can drink all the water you can possibly drink. Things are pretty good in Oregon for the pioneers, right? Nothing bad ever happens on the Oregon Trail. But wait, after you drank all that water and ate all that dagger meat, you realize something's wrong. You feel like you're gonna have a bad time. Something's not right. You're having lower intestinal duress. But wait, this is the panel description from the website. I didn't see a 13 plus on my panel. I didn't see an 18 plus on my panel even. That could have made this a really very different panel. Instead, we've got our Eyes on You, Brandon panel. And I see some enforcers in the back cringing a couple of times on this panel. I'm going to try to thread the needle a little bit and hopefully get an invite back next year. Anyways, lower intestinal duress. People who are familiar with lower intestinal duress will know what happens after. And again, PG panel, so we're going to use our imagination. How did this get in here? Firefighters are so important. Anyways, we've died of dysentery. we had to include this on the panel. So dysentery, for those of you who don't know what dysentery is, it's very demure. It's very mindful. It's very unpleasant. It exists in real life. It's known as acute bloody diarrheal disease. Sometimes you can use it as a catch-all term for diarrheal disease. Generally, I'm going to focus on the bloody version. I've been watching Castlevania. Bloody Tears is a great song. Bloody diarrhea is kind of like Bloody Tears. It can be caused by bacteria, usually Shigella or Cryptosporidium genus type. There's also salmonella. You can get that from eating uncooked pork or sketchy eggs that might have been fired out of the mouth of a bird. Parasites. If you have this living in you, you might need more than just Michelle to help figure out how this got in you in the first place and how you're not dead. The symptoms are bloody diarrhea, high fever, upset stomach, nausea, vomiting.
No picture?
Okay, so remember, like, they've got their eyes on us. PAX is watching, Lexi. We want to come back. I'm not putting photos of bloody diarrhea in front of a crowd. So here's your picture. So taking a step back for a sec, it's a pretty big problem. Diarrheal disease is the third leading cause of death among children worldwide. Mortality rates can be as high as 4.2%. Between 5 and 15% of diarrheal deaths among people 0 to 5 in India are caused by these diseases. But thankfully, there are treatments. Antibiotics, and thankfully they're not this big. Fluids, rest, Mario's holy trinity. But there are some challenges also, right? Like dysentery is still a meme because dysentery still exists, and also because the Oregon Trail is still being played by people. More on that later. Shigella antibiotic resistance has increased. This is my very realistic photo of a Shigella bacteria. I got this from my lab, don't at me. But Shigella has been doing some pretty nasty stuff lately. It's becoming bigger and fatter and meaner. And so fluoroquinolone resistance is becoming antibiotic resistant. It's increased from like 0.6% in the 90s to like 30% like in the late 2000s. Some species have become completely resistant in the US and Vietnam. And then this Shigella here decided to become a big shot. And it's like becoming even more resistant to other like more modern antibiotics. So that's challenge number one. Remember challenge number one, we're gonna go to challenge number two. Challenge number two is that we have limited access to clean water around the world. And it can really exacerbate the issue because if you keep drinking things that give you, things that PAX won't let me show you, then you're gonna have dysentery still exist. And also, for those of you who like going camping in this beautiful, colorful area, lots of trees, lots of woods, lots of ponds and streams, you may be familiar with giardiosis. This can also cause diarrheal disease. So lots of things that cause this because the water's dirty. So the solutions, I don't want you to like leave here just being like, I'm gonna die of dysentery, I went to Seattle. So the solutions are, vaccines are being developed, against Shigella, Salmonella, other bacteria that cause dysentery. We can make these in plants, theoretically. If any of you work for the NIH, we could use some grant money, please, I'm begging you. Other solutions, we have living antibiotics. So like if the small molecule drugs that folks like Andrew may be developing one day aren't sufficient, there are also efforts to generate these antibiotic bacteria essentially that attack other bacteria and outcompete them. We actually did a panel on this one PAX about how we would make real Metroids and how they kind of already exist, these vampire bacteria. We could also improve access to clean water with no human sacrifice required. It's not our destiny to step into a radioactive chamber, Fox. When your home looks like this, you get really interested in water really quickly, and so obviously I have to make a plug. There are folks at ASU that are working on these insane bacteria that can sequester heavy metals and also generate energy in the process. And there are also folks up here at UW that are working on these amazing filters that you can basically just suck through a straw. And you've seen the life straws on TV, or maybe you've used them yourselves. They're working on making them so that they're a lot more cheap and a lot easier to drink through. And so if we solve the antibiotic problem and we solve the water problem, we don't have any more dysentery. And so one last thing, a big secret. This is the never before seen. This is PAX. This is the convention of debuts and never before seen data. This isn't a video game, probably, but if you want to make the game, this is something you may never see again. I want you to maybe get your cameras out because you might not, no one will believe you've seen this thing. It's amazing. It's a screen of research on our computers from our lab. Who's seen this screen before? Who's done this without cheating before?
Up, more hands went down.
Liars.
Beautiful Washington.
Yeah.
Anyways, last plug. Thanks for helping. Thanks to ASU for getting Lizzie and I here. It was quite expensive to get up here, but thanks. We want to come back again in the future. So yeah, we'll end that with some questions.
And now for our favorite part of the panel. So now that you've heard a bunch about bioweapons and dysentery and carbon monoxide, now it's time for audience interaction. We've got 2 microphones, both on opposite sides of the audience, depending on whichever is closest to you. You get to ask your questions about your favorite diseases and ways to die from video games, to ask our panelists to see, do we have any solutions? Do we have any real-world comparable Metroids or Pokerus or things of that nature? So take a moment to line on up, and we will take audience Q&A at this point.
Whoa, not everyone at once.
Everybody shuffle around. We've got our first question ready to go.
Hi. It's all right now.
You have a nice
One of you mentioned about using antibiotics as sort of living attack vectors for taking out viruses or taking out bad bacteria per se. Can you Is it theoretically possible to do this with a virus, engineer a virus in such a way where it can attack another virus?
Well, a little bit less of, I'm sure maybe there are viruses that attack other viruses, but it'd be more of a roundabout kind of thing. You could engineer viruses that attack the bacteria that are already infected by other viruses as kind of a middleman. And there's definitely research already happening on that point. There's like phage therapies that can genetically engineer you, but also there are phage therapies that are kind of just roundabout antibiotics.
Thank you.
Next question.
How realistic is poison tick damage from games like Pokemon?
Good question.
I can, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, it depends on the poison. There's a lot of things that can poison you. Things that, like carbon monoxide, if it's like acute or chronic or over time, it can make you kind of like die slowly, very slowly. If it's a chronic poisoning where you just like feel worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So if you have a health bar in real life, like everyone can see that in the bottom right corner of their eyes, right? Just me? Oh, okay. Anyway, yeah, so that just kind of can go down as you get poisoned with a chronic like chemical like that. Joe?
And then there's things like toxins, so biological poisons essentially. If you get bit by a snake, it'll start hurting after about half an hour, and then an hour your face is double the size, and after a couple hours, if you don't get treatment, you're just dead. So in that case, not really. A lot of biological poisons, or toxins I should say, just are going to at some point get you, and it's usually very quick.
But there's treatments for a lot of them.
Most of them, for now.
There's antidotes in Pokemon.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, I was wondering, for the panel as a whole, if any of you had ever looked into or read into the corrupted blood incident.
I know what that is. So this is, I'll try and summarize it real quick. So in World of Warcraft, there was a status called Corrupted Blood, and then it spread in a very plague-like way to different player characters. So people were like sequestering in little corners of the map, hoping that they didn't get it, because if I remember correctly, it would kill your character and you could not resurrect. And they didn't fix it for a while, so everyone was panicking about their character not being alive anymore and how they were going to fix it. So it's used nowadays by actual epidemiologists to say, okay, here's how people reacted. How does that translate to actual action? Because until recently, we didn't really have good data on how people act in a pandemic scenario. There's a lot of modeling. Now we know too well how people react. And I do believe it was fairly similar. So some people just went, it's fine. And other people went, I'm going to hide in a corner forever. And that's pretty much what happened during the Corrupted Blood incident as well.
Yeah, it's my favorite little trivia bit about it is it was supposed to stay within one of the boss areas from with the expansion when it came out. But the developers forgot to cleanse the effect from Hunter's pets that were banished when it had the effect. So it infected the player population through the pet population of Hunters. So it went to humans from another animal vector like we see in a lot of different plagues.
Yeah, just like ticks got on rats, that got on ships, that then got shipped, and then we got the Black Plague. Mm-hmm. Basically, same exact scenario, which is why it's very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Next
Hello,
question.
this is to everyone. How many of you have played Plague Inc? Okay. My favorite disease is the Neurax worm. There are two ways you can win. Either kill off humanity or get the whole world to worship your worm.
Oh my God.
Do you guys have a favorite name to give to the worm?
Hypnotoad.
The whole world worships PAX West as their god and master. For example, you can say that.
I've used PAX as my preferred Neurax worm name a few times.
The whole world worships. And yeah, nematodes. Yeah, so you can get the whole world to worship whatever you want it to worship.
Do you want to play
I
Plague
think
Inc?
that'll be it.
I'll just go fishing next time. Anyway. All right, so I've got three things, but just to boil it down. Your opinions on ghouls from Fallout, on how that how the disease can affect them in that way.
Ooh, you're hitting on some cut content. We had slides about the ghouls.
Yeah, so the ghouls are interesting in that, first off, I believe it switches between different games, because there's so many different games what caused the ghouls to occur. So FEV was part of it, radiation was part of it, and since we know FEV can rewrite DNA, and we have things called telomeres that are these caps on our DNA, and as they degrade, we age, and then once the caps are gone, we get old really fast, and then we die. So it wouldn't be too crazy to think that ghouls being super mutated plus FEV combining together just gave them super long, crazy telomeres. I don't know about that juice that you gotta get out other ghouls to drink. I don't know how that goes into it. Maybe it's telomere boosting juice. I drink some, but that's just me.
You drink Kool-Aid?
I would drink Kool-Aid. Made in Florida. So it's interesting that it's a very niche case that would have had to happen between the interactions of radiation and FEV's original purpose to make
they're
ghouls.
rare for a reason.
Yeah.
Like like when you nuke Megaton, only one person becomes a ghoul in the entire thing.
Exactly. So definitely could just happen that way.
Could be just genetics.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hello. Earlier in the panel, we were talking about slime molds, and there was something you were very excited about, but we're not going to get into. Can we get into it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so it was how slime molds are able to find the shortest path to a food source. And so essentially, they don't have brains, they don't have neural networks. So it's really cool that they can do this, but they just leave behind trails of mucus, and they can sense where that mucus is. So if they've already explored an area that didn't have food, they won't go back. So that's essentially how they move. So they feel the mucus, and then they just don't go there, so they can find the shortest path, use the least amount of energy. So that was it.
Would that be similar to like chemtrails with like insects, or is that something?
Oh, that I'm not so familiar.
Like ant pheromones, things like that.
Oh, well.
It's like kids in boogers.
This
is mine.
Exactly. That's a perfect example, actually. That's exactly what it's like.
It's all mucus.
Disgusting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi. I was wondering if you guys had played the Metroid Prime games and were familiar with with Phazon. So it's like, it's a poison, it's a mutagen, it's an energy source, it's mind control, it's anything you need. What do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Phazon. So one of the panels we were thinking about writing for next year was going to be like just the most insane plants in in video games, and we did some preliminary research on Phazon because there exists in like the areas like Chernobyl bacteria that essentially are able to like live just on radiation alone. And so it's not entirely impossible that they're eating radioactive material. They could be pooping out radioactive material. And since Phazon is highly radioactive, like my hypothesis is that the phasite meteors that come down are just made of like super radioactive elements that I don't know how to deal with the sentience part. That'll be maybe next year I'll have an answer for you. But I think that it's probably inspired by, there's like a term for these bacteria that eat like radioactive stuff and sustain themselves on radioactive stuff. Chemist, do you have an idea?
Radiosynthesis.
I think
Coined
that's
it right
actually
now. Oh, wait, what? Oh, I got it.
Yeah, radiosynthetic bacteria. But yeah, I think that Phazon actually, besides like the pseudo-sentience part, it isn't that far off. Like there are definitely like the potential for super mutagenic, super radioactive things.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Hi, I don't know how many of you have played Elden Ring, but I was wondering if any of you have thought about the Scarlet Rot, because it does a lot of things. It messes up landscapes, it infects creatures, it infects people, and it kind of just makes you lose your mind and sometimes makes your flesh rot, but it doesn't kill you.
I haven't played Elden Ring yet because I'm trying to finish my PhD, but I'm going to play it as soon as I'm done.
They're two conflicting forces.
It's also because I still haven't beaten the final boss in Sekiro because I've been sidetracked by the Shura of Hatred. But at least if I'm guessing since they're from the same studio, like Dragonrod isn't too dissimilar, but more focused on like individuals. Like we had some slides about like resurrection sicknesses and various rots in video games, and there's this weird spiritual component to like the like Elden Ring Crimson Rot, you said?
Scarlet Rot.
Scarlet Rot, and then Dragon Rot and Sekiro, that we weren't able to really figure out scientifically how to address without offending like half of the audience. But at least on the biological side, like resurrection sicknesses causing other people to be like sickened isn't super out there. We were going to talk about cryonics, like where people like freeze their organs and hope that one day science gets good enough to turn them from like a jelly puddle into a person again. And we figured that when that process would happen, it would probably impact the various pathogens that live in the person's body already, which could very much easily create humans that like spawn plant pathogens or humans that spawn animal pathogens and like reinfect everything. So I'd imagine that any rot from any game that is based on resurrection at least probably comes from some kind of mutation that occurs during the resurrection process. In case you play Sekiro and are interested.
Yeah, well, and so based on what you said, I'm not familiar with that game. I haven't played it. But you said it affects landscapes, so it can infect plants and humans. Yeah, and so that's interesting because again, I don't know the game, but I can tell you like a little bit of science because zoonotic diseases exist typically between animals and humans, right? And plants have viruses, like they have a bunch of viruses, and you guys probably don't realize it, but like you actually probably even eat them when you eat plants and stuff like that. You have viruses inside you that don't hurt you, but the reason they don't hurt you is because plants and humans are so biologically different that it requires different things to be hurt, you know? And so if going from a plant to a human, a bit of a stretch is what I would think.
There are still the innate receptors, right?
Yes.
You could probably complement mediated like rot.
Did you say complement?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, in humans, yeah. So, no, but I can see it. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah, but this is where we get to stretch science, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next question.
Hi, so this is a niche video game, but there's this disease called Radical 6, which slows down the victim's brain processing speed by the square root of 6. I was wondering how possible that would be, because basically it doesn't kill them, it just drives them insane. Like, because if people speak like normal, they hear gibberish because they can't process it.
So there's actually, so speaking of fungus, there's neurotropic fungus that can actually infect the brain, which can lead to Alzheimer's-like symptoms. So slowing of processing, speech, eventually degrading the brain. So yeah, that's possible. There's also viruses that can infect the brain that, like, if everybody has heard of this one, rabies. It can actually do some pretty funky things to the brain if it gets there. It can cause individuals to have hydrophobia, so they physically can't drink water because it causes such severe spasms, and it can also lead to kind of erratic behavior because it just starts damaging the brain.
Thank you. Next one.
Hi, so I had a question on the blight from Dragon Age. Any possibility, or would it have any parallels to any real life conditions or diseases?
Anybody played Dragon Age?
I've played a lot of Dragon Age. I'm thinking about the parallels question because it's a disease that infects people what I'm thinking about is you drink the blood of blighted things and you either die or you get a sense of where all the other blighted creatures are. Right. And to me, that would have to be something that has self-recognition across long distances. So you're going to need something that's complex. So you're not going to be able to do a virus or a bacteria. It would probably have to be some sort of fungus or parasite, because those are more complicated organisms that can know where roughly each other are if they're touching. Wireless, that's another question, but it would probably have to be some sort of bacteria or fungus, or not bacteria, but fungus or parasite.
I also had another question, if it's okay.
Go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, from a POV, if in small doses or exposure generationally, if they had more time, would the FEV have worked as intended and evolved a human?
I think it's interesting because the FEV did work as intended in the very controlled, we're going to make super soldiers way, and it's highly programmable. And the issue is the dose and radiation. So if in the original game, the master is trying to get into the vault to grab everyone who's not been exposed to radiation, turn them into super mutants, which is not the worst idea because super mutants are not able to be affected by radiation. So, and they retain some intelligence. They're a little bit dampered down. But you could definitely take where it's at and probably engineer, if you had someone who was still alive that was smart enough, engineer it back and say, okay, how do we get around the problem of radiation?
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
We are in our last 10 minutes of the panel, so speed run. Let's hear it.
My question is more opinionated. Are there any diseases, parasites, infections, anything like that that you guys want to see represented in a video game?
Flu.
He does a lot of flu research, so bias.
Yeah, it's like there are video games where you have like the green flu that might be causing zombieism, like Left 4 Dead. But like I want like actual flu. I want there to be like an actual flu pandemic that like crashes the world and makes an apocalyptic video game.
Any others?
I love fungus. I want to see more fungus. The Last of Us is the one staple for fungus in video games, but there's so many types and they can have so many interesting behaviors. I want more fungus.
More fungi rep.
There's Mario,
Yeah.
right?
In my very non-biased opinion, I don't know, parasites, you could do a lot with nematodes. Yeah, I was thinking that too. Go ahead. No, yeah. I mean, it would be interesting if they also used cancer in some form or like a virus that causes that, which is also kind of real. You know, those do exist, but yeah.
I'm biased. I like viruses. But I would probably say there's one not well known. It's called LCMV. It's lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, also neurotropic, so it can transfer into your neurons and go all the way to your brain, and it can be transmitted by rats, actually within the 4 corners, so Arizona, Colorado, and the other 2 states that I can't remember.
Another reason why we're up here and not down there.
What's that?
Another reason why we came up to Washington. Next question.
So I want to bring up Dead Space necromorphs. The thing that really fascinated me about it, it's like a flesh-eating blood virus and everything, and it reanimates the body very quickly after the host is infected. The thing that like really pointed out to me is that it can survive in a vacuum. How realistic, or are there any like type of spreading virus like that could exist in a vacuum and still spread?
Are we able to get evil tardigrades?
I know.
Maybe.
I was thinking the same thing. I would think there's certain DNA viruses that are very stable, like smallpox. That one is pretty stable on the surface. So if like an infected person were to take a scab, rub it on the table, it could survive for a decent amount of time without degrading, and it could infect somebody if it gets into orifice, eyes, or like an open wound. But in space, that's a good question. Maybe if it's like freeze-dried?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to make it so different viruses don't degrade. And if you apply some of those techniques, it would be more likely that it would survive for a long time. The issue in space is all the radiation. But if you're on something like a space station, you're not getting the radiation, and there's something else that happens in space to pathogens where they get weird mutations and actions just by being in 0G. Yeah. So if you're on a space station and you release something, say on Omega, and it has a lot of weird characteristics, it'll mutate fast in ways that are really hard to predict on Earth.
Basically, we're building Deoxys.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
This is going to be absolutely the most important question to receive all panel. Thoughts on Greek salad?
I hate all salads. They're offensive to my research.
I like them. They got tomatoes.
Salad has carbon in it.
I think they're good. They're good.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next question.
If you had to live in a world that's been torn apart by a virus or parasite in a video game, which world would you choose and why?
All of them. Just kidding.
I would go with virus, just because we already have vaccines against viruses. We may be able to solve it. Fungi, I mean, there are fungal vaccines in the pipeline, but I feel like if the world were to crash like right now, I'm not confident we would be able to have the resources in a lab that's easily accessible to make a vaccine against them.
I was actually asking for a specific game that you'd want to live in.
Oh. Ooh.
Tears of the Kingdom, because there's also like magic and stuff. I think that'd be pretty cool.
I'll go with Mass Effect, because they have metagel and a bunch of other cool stuff, and I can fly a spaceship.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the idea of having magic. Like, if I was doing my research and I had magic, we'd have a lot of funding. Yeah. I don't know. So, yeah. So, a world like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Next question.
So my question is about cordyceps specifically. So I know that when ants die, they exude a pheromone that tells other ants to come pick them up, basically, and bring them to the graveyard. When an ant is infected with cordyceps, does that affect that at all?
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually am not sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question, but I don't know. I'm sorry. I can't answer it.
We do have like a giant ant research group too at ASU.
Yeah.
I wish we brought one of them with us.
Yeah, that would have been a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next one.
Hello, so I'm a big fan of Dead Space, and one of the interesting things there is a lot of the environment is actually covered in organic material, actually human material. And we know with Henry of Lax that cancer and other cells can actually survive outside of a human body, actually a dead body. How likely or how possible in a world like that would it be for the environment to basically become overwhelmed with organic material, like human cells and just cancerous blob over everything?
Surprisingly
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
So there's several different viruses that cause cancers. Henrietta Lacks actually was infected, if I'm remembering correctly, with human papillomavirus, which causes cervical cancer and a lot of other things. So that's where her cancer cells come from. And there's plenty of different other viruses that cause cancers. So it's not too far out to think there's a virus happening in dead space causing these infections. And as part of that, I mean, it kills people fast and then reanimates them. Some wonky stuff is going on. It's in space. Maybe it's making cancer of a lot of these cells, and that cancer is doing what cancer does. It's just growing crazily without any rhyme or reason, so it's all up in the walls.
Yeah, and my thought is, I kind of agree with that, but I also think in addition to what you said, there would need to be an evolutionary push to kind of allow that, because right now when we grow cancer cells, they're maintained in you know, a really specific environment, but like you were saying, in space, things change. So, you know, yeah, I would agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Interesting.
Thank you. Next question.
What are your thoughts on animals evolving to take advantage of diseases? I'm thinking the frenzy virus from Monster Hunter.
I think this already kind of happens in the real world, right? Like, there are animals that will like preferentially eat, like, for instance, fungal infections of plants, truffles, for instance. I think it's very likely that, like, it's more abundant than we think. I think that ants also cultivate fungi. I don't know. I think it'd be hard for like without intervention, like on our end as like scientists, to find some kind of animal that takes a lot of deliberate advantage of like viral infections. But also, I mean, like, aren't like some of our neurons using like viral proteins to chaperone stuff?
Yeah, there's just over the course of enough evolution, we get symbiotic relationships. So if you think about the gut microbiome, we have a bunch of stuff that lives inside of us at all times that helps us out because we help it out. So you could probably engineer that.
Yeah, and actually the person that you love is like 8% virus or something like that. Yeah, it's like you actually have virus encoded in your DNA because over time, evolutionarily, you've picked up some of those genes. But that's like over long, long periods of time. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we only have time for one more question, but we will have an opportunity after the panel if you want to come on up and talk to the scientists individually to ask your questions. Before we get cut off with time, I do want to mention that we have a QR code at the end of the panel to review our panel. This is our 5th year paneling at PAX, and we're so excited to be here for the 20th anniversary. So if you enjoyed our scientific talks, make sure to rate us. If you did not enjoy the science today, then we have been Acquisitions Inc., and that's who you can review instead. So last couple of seconds, final question. Oh. Do you have a final question?
Yeah, I do.
Nope.
Yeah. A whole lot of this panel has been about like story-driven and narrative use of infections. Do you have any advice on implementing infections in maybe a multiplayer gameplay as like a gameplay mechanic? Maybe your favorite examples or pet peeves as scientists?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, we should.
I think like most zombie games that have like multiplayer where you can have like soldiers versus zombies kind of thing, that's always fun. But I'd like to see just more examples generally of disease as like a debuff in video games, particularly multiplayer games. Right. Like if in Smash, like you had a disease that made you trip more often or something, like Pokerus in Pikachu.
I really liked in Returnal where you can get parasites that give you a debuff but also give you an advantage, and so you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. So having that in a multiplayer of like, what are you parasitically attached to maybe give you an advantage or not, I think was really fun.
Yeah, really excellent questions, you guys.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. It's been a wonderful audience. So fun being here at PAX. Come talk to us.
Yeah, this was so fun.